My name's Joanne Richards, and I am the president of Common Ground for Texans, and I'd like to welcome all of you today. I do want to remind you that this is part one of a two-part program. The League of Women Voters of Austin and Common Ground for Texans have joined forces to bring you a conversation about what to expect on the May 1st ballot. And so we'll have people speaking in support of ballot initiatives and those propositions rather, and those who are opposing them. I'm glad to see that Councilmember Poole is here, and so she may be able to shed a little bit of light on some of these as well. And in our April meeting will be April 17th, and that conversation will be about how to approach and consume news. So we'll have a number of different folks come talk to us about the research that they've done at the university and some local initiatives on how to approach the news that we receive and read. So we hope that you will stay tuned for that. So without further ado, I think I will turn the mic over to Mike and he'll tell you how we're going to run today.
Well, thanks, Joanne, and welcome everyone. Pleased at this wonderful turnout on a really nice afternoon here. If you're like me, you may be taking a break from trimming away some of the dead plants around your house. I know a lot of us have that problem, but it is a glorious spring afternoon in Texas, that brief window of each year where the Texas weather is not actively trying to kill us. So welcome to this special meeting here. We have a special election coming up in Austin. It's going to be on May 1st. Early voting is April 19th to 27th. And it's a special election because we are voting on 8 special ballot measures. We are, as Joanne said, partnering with the League of Women Voters. We'll be discussing some of the ballot measures today, and then next Saturday, the League of Women Voters will be sponsoring and hosting another meeting to discuss the other ballot measures. The process today is to give you some background information about these special elections and how these ballot measures come about. And then we'll discuss it with our 2 panel members today. We have Allison from Austinites for Progressive Reform and Jason Lopez with the Austin AFL-CIO. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat window and they'll go to Ham Richards. Ham will be able to ask the questions as a group for everyone, and we can respond to it with the panel members. We tried to get it so that we have a for and against discussion for each of the propositions. That doesn't always work out. In some cases, we may have just informational session or one advocate for one side, but we'll always give you some information about it. Because this is a special election, the turnout tends to be lower than usual. So that's all the more important to get out and vote and cast an informed vote on this. So I'm glad you're being good citizens and showing up to get the background information for these special measures. So I'm going to ask for Allison to give us some background information on this whole process, because Andrew has been very active in politics in the Austin area for a while. He founded Main Street Hub in Austin, employs about 700 people, downtown Austin. He previously worked at the Brennan Center for Justice and was actually on the speechwriting team for John Kerry's 2004 presidential campaign. And Andrew is chair of the Austinites for Progressive Reform. It's a political action committee that helped get some of these propositions on the ballot. So, Andrew, unlike the state of California, the state of Texas doesn't really have a method for getting citizens to get ballots on the election measures. But Austin, city of Austin apparently does. So Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about this whole process? Are these binding or just getting a sense of the public opinion? What is the process for getting a measure on the city ballot like this? And what did your PAC actually do in terms of playing a role in getting some of the measures on the ballot? And then we'll get some brief background from Jason. And Leslie Poole, if you have a few comments, we'll give you the floor too after that. So Andrew, let's start with some background information from you.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to everybody for devoting a part of your Saturday afternoon to this conversation. Some background first on our group, and then I can describe how the process worked. We are a democracy reform campaign to make Austin the most pro-democracy city in the country. And we've proposed a series of charter amendments that would each have the effect of making our local government more representative, responsive, diverse, and accountable to the people that it serves. We started this process last year with a steering committee of 15 local leaders who drafted proposed charter amendments. And then we had a community engagement process with 17 meetings over the course of about a month, more people participating in those meetings and providing feedback than during the last two city-run charter processes combined. And then that takes us to our petition drive, and this gets to the other part of Mike's question. There are two ways to put a charter amendment on the ballot for Austin. And one way is for the city council to convene a charter review commission, and that commission would meet and propose amendments to the city council, which would then decide to vote or not on whether to put those amendments on the ballot for the city to vote on. And the other path is for a citizens campaign to organize a petition drive and secure 20,000 signatures from Austin voters, registered Austin voters. And if a group is able to get that many signatures, and if the clerk certifies those signatures, then the council puts those amendments on the ballot. So those are the two paths that a charter amendment can take. And then in each path, it goes to the voters for a vote. So if a majority of Austinites vote yes on any charter amendment, then it becomes part of the city charter, and that means it's law. The city charter is like our local constitution. Thanks for the question, Mike.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll turn to Jason Lopez briefly here. Jason is a 15-year employee of the city of Austin. He worked at the business system analysis as a business system analyst for Austin Energy. He currently works as a policy advisor for City Council member Ann Kitchen, and he's the current president of the Austin AFL-CIO Central Labor Council, the founding member of By the People, ATX. So Jason, did the AFL-CIO have any role in these propositions, or are they taking a public stance on any of these?
Thanks for the question, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Mike said, my name is Jason Lopez. I live in South Austin, and I'm a Travis County Democratic Precinct Chair of Precinct 441 in South Austin. And I've been active in our community for some time now. I'm the president of the Central Labor Council here in Austin. And through my membership of AFSCME Local 1624, which is the local public employees union. But the Central Labor Council represents about over 20 local unions. That's everything from construction industry, plumbers and carpenters, electricians, and then also we have the teachers unions, people that work at AT&T. We have a wide array of workers here in Austin that are organized under the local AFL-CIO. And you know, to be frank, no, we were not part of this process. Andrew described a very privatized process for how all of these charter amendments came about. You know, typically when done through the public process, through city council or through public meetings, there are requirements for public posting of meetings. There are Open Meetings Act requirements. There are certain documents that are made available to everyone, meeting minutes and such, how votes are taken and what those votes, the results of those votes. All of that process that normally happens through the city council and through City Hall was completely privatized and done through a self-selected group of individuals in order to push these initiatives through. And we heard about these late last year. We heard about APR's initiative, and you know, we met with Andrew and some of his team and talked with them through it, and ultimately decided that we didn't think this was the right direction for Austin. And specifically, you know, they put together a slew of charter amendments, 4 of them originally, and one of them really stood out, and that was the Strong Mayor Amendment. It would fundamentally change our system of government in Austin, our municipal government, to give a strong mayor, a single at-large elected mayor, veto power over the entire council. And
Jason,
you know,
Jason, we're going to be talking about the whole amendment very soon. So
okay, great. Well, you know, to be frank, then you know, the short answer is no. The AFL-CIO and most of our members were not part of that. Most of our entities were not part of that process.
Okay, thanks, Jason. And Councilwoman Leslie Poole, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you had anything else you wanted to say, hi or welcome, I just want to give you that opportunity.
Thanks, Mike. And hey to everybody. It's so good to see you all. I'm really glad to be here. I'll just make 3 little points and 1 little statement to start off. One, I live in precinct 236. I too am a proud member of AFSCME, a long time union member, probably as long as I've lived and worked in Austin. I've been a union member, and I'm in my 3rd term on council. I would like to just make 1 little comment about the process. Jason called it privileged and privatized that Andrew engaged in, and I agree with that. I would have gladly initiated a charter review commission last year. I did that in 2016. I brought the resolution to engage the charter commission that year, but Andrew never asked.
Okay, thanks for that. So this should be an interesting discussion today. We're going to talk about propositions D, E, F, and H, and then next week the League of Women Voters will host a meeting on the other propositions. So I'll mention the name of it. I think Joanne put the detailed text of each proposition in the chat window already. And then we'll have a little bit of discussion. If you have any questions about these, again, please feel free to enter them into the chat at any time. We may take 1 or 2 clarifying questions after our panel speaks, but then we'll have time at the end to go over all the other questions. So on to proposition D. This is a fairly simple one. It changes the date of the mayoral elections. And I know Andrew wants to speak on that. Joanne, are you also going to speak on that particular one? Okay. So Andrew first, and then Joanne. So Andrew, can you tell us about this particular proposal? What is the current date for the elections and what will be changed to and why?
Yes, thank you, Mike. Currently, we elect our mayor in midterm elections ever since 2014. And our proposal would move the mayor's election to presidential years. beginning with 2024. That's what Proposition D is all about. And the reason for the proposition is that consistently our presidential year turnout is much higher and much more diverse, more representative of Austin as a whole. You know, for the last 15 years in Austin, on average, our midterm turnout has been 20 percentage points lower than our presidential year turnout. That's more than 100,000 Austin voters who are not participating in our midterm elections, who otherwise participate in our presidential elections. And on top of that, those voters are more diverse than our midterm electorate. So our presidential electorate looks the most like Austin, economically, racially, in every way. It looks the most like Austin of any electorate that we have. So our steering committee, the 15 people who wrote this reform, and their names are available on our website. I just dropped a link in the chat. Our steering committee said, well, we should have our city's largest electorate and its most representative and diverse electorate be the electorate that chooses our city's highest elected official, the mayor. So that's what this reform would do. Specifically, we have a mayor's election scheduled in 2022. And this proposal would have the mayor that is elected in 2022 serve for 2 years so that we can have a mayor's election in 2024, and we'll be back on 4-year terms at that time. So every 4 years starting in 2024.
Thank you. Joanne, did you have additional information on that?
Sure. I guess I will, by personal privilege, I guess, as president of the organization and someone who's quite active in the field, I've expressed my concern to Andrew on other occasions. And my major concern about this particular issue is that under most circumstances, I would agree that the largest number of folks should be involved in electing our elected officials. On the other hand, my concern here is that it will nationalize our local election. And nationalizing our local election, I don't think is a good idea, at least if it's during the election of our governor's year. At least it's within the state of Texas and Texas politics rather than national politics.
Thank you. Jason, if you had any comments?
Yeah, if I could just add, you know, when the community came up with 10-1 and passed 10-1, we had the opportunity to align those dates. And they specifically chose to align it with the gubernatorial election rather than the presidential election, because they had the foresight to see that changing it to a presidential year would really increase the need for money and moneyed interests to drive a campaign for the mayor. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks. Hamilton Richards, do we get any questions asking for clarification on any of this?
No questions, just a couple of comments. One is, can you please post the propositions as they are being addressed? And the other is from Marilyn Bostic, says, I agree in the effect it has on voter suppression.
Would you mind if I responded to a couple of the comments made?
Sure, go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. I think that there are, well, first of all, let me point out that there is a lot of study on this issue, historically going back decades. And no study has, we all know that the presidential election has a lot of activity around it, but no study has found that the activity of the presidential election would interfere with the consideration of local issues and how a jurisdiction or a municipality or city is equipped to handle the conversation around local issues that happens at the bottom of the ballot. I think that it's certainly a very understandable concern, of course, because we're all familiar with activity and engagement around presidential elections. But our steering committee wanted to follow the data as much as they could in coming up with this proposal and all of the others. And what they found was the only consistent data across decades is that the turnout in presidential elections is higher and more diverse. And I think to the point that Jason made, I think if we believe that our neighbors and us and the other voters in Austin will be bought and paid for by moneyed interests for an election, then we shouldn't have elections at all. But none of us believe that. We believe that these decisions should be left up to the voters. And I think that we shouldn't accept a situation where we say to more than 100,000 of our neighbors, our Austinites, that we're going to keep the mayoral ballot where it is and not move to a date where they will participate as well, because we believe that they will be bought by whomever is campaigning at that time. I think we ought to give everybody the opportunity to come out and vote and put our elections where our people are coming out, and rely on organizations like the LWV, like Common Ground, and others to help educate voters around those election dates. But to deny them an opportunity because we believe that in some way they will be less informed or more easily fooled than the rest of us, I think is anti-democratic and not the direction that we should strive in as a city.
Okay, thanks. Jason, did you have anything else you want to comment on?
No, that's fine. I think I said what I believe. I mean, the other thing that's curious about this whole thing is speaking about how important it is to align these when we know that there are lots of voters turning out, and yet here we are changing the fundamental documents that set how our local democracy is organized in a very low turnout mayoral election.
That's a good point. Whether or not these ballot initiatives should be on a type of election with this much more turnout is an interesting proposition to discuss at some point.
Mike, there's one question.
Yeah.
And that is, Al Hyder asks, can Andrew point us to the data that he's using and cite his sources?
Yes, thank you.
And Marilyn Bostic has a question. Was this bipartisan?
Thank you very much for both of those questions. I will post references to the academic research in the chat. In particular, there is a professor who has studied this issue of election timing for a long time. His name is Zoltan Hajnal, and I'll post links to his research in the chat. As to the second question, I don't know the voting history of all of the 15 people who participated in our steering committee, but I believe some would, I don't know if any would identify as Republican. I believe some identify as independent and may have voting history on both sides. But certainly our group was a majority progressives and Democrats.
Okay, thanks. So these are kind of the easy warm-up questions for us. I want to go to Proposition E, which is one that will enable ranked choice voting for city elections. This is something that actually members of Common Ground for Texans have been advocating for some time. So I'm glad to see this on the ballot. And we have, again, I believe Andrew will address this. I'm not sure if he's going to take a for or against stance. And Joanne has some comments on this too. So ranked choice voting. Why was this a good idea? And do you think people will approve it?
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mike. Yes, this is one of 5 of the propositions on the ballot that were brought by our campaign and our steering committee and on our petition. And Proposition E, which is about ranked choice voting, would essentially eliminate the need for runoff elections in Austin. As you all know, we tend to always have a December runoff election in Austin for a city council races or for the mayor's race. And these elections are a few things. They are low turnout for sure. They can have turnout as low as 11%, and it rarely breaks 20%. Also, they're expensive. They can cost the Austin taxpayer hundreds of thousands of dollars to hold this runoff election where very few people vote. So we believe that we should move to a form of voting called ranked choice voting, which is not new. It would be new to Austin, but it's been tested and proven across the country in states and cities alike. It is a system of voting where in November, we would have the opportunity to rank our favorite candidates in order of preference. You wouldn't have to rank, you could vote for only one, but you'd also be able to rank them if you wanted to. And that would allow election administrators to conduct an instant runoff, an automatic one, where if nobody got 50%, then the votes would be tabulated in a way that respected the preferences of voters and arrived at a winner. And I can talk about the mechanics of exactly how ranked choice voting works, if you all would like. And the advantage, there are many advantages to this. Of course, it allows us to tap into our very high turnout November election to select the winner, as opposed to enduring the 50-point turnout drop that can sometimes happen between November and December. It would also save the city hundreds of thousands of dollars. It has been proven to decrease negative campaigning by as much as 30%. And the reason for that is if you're campaigning, you want to get somebody's first place vote. But if you can't get their first place vote, then you would like their second place vote or their third place vote. And so you're unlikely to attack their favorite candidates harshly. And what it leads to is more focus on issues and less focus on personal attacks. It's also been just proven to be very well supported by the folks who use it, the voters. There have been surveys in jurisdictions that have adopted ranked choice voting, and by and large and entirely, the voters say, this new form of voting is great, we like it, we don't want to go back. It polls very highly in terms of voter satisfaction. So what we're saying is let's adopt that for Austin. Let's benefit from higher turnout, lower costs, happier voters, less negative campaigning, and it will be a win-win across the board for Austin. I think the biggest challenge with ranked choice, which you may hear, is the allegation that it is illegal in Texas. And I want to address that proactively. There is the law, the election code is silent on ranked choice voting. It is not mentioned in the election code, and no court has ever ruled on it. But the reason why there is a belief that it is illegal is because there's a 20-year-old Texas Secretary of State's opinion letter, which is a non-binding letter, in which the Secretary of State at the time said that he did not believe that ranked choice voting was consistent with state law. So we may need to ultimately have the legislature clarify this, and or we may need to have a court case clarify it, but we're confident the legislature will. This is a bipartisan issue. It's an issue that's been adopted in Republican legislatures and by Republican voters as well. But whether either before or after the law is clarified, Austin would need to amend its charter in order to adopt ranked choice voting. So we have brought this amendment, which everybody agrees the amendment is 100% legal. The amendment says Austin shall use ranked choice voting provided that it is permissible by state law. So what we can do is pass this amendment now and have ranked choice voting in our charter ready to go as soon as the law is clarified. And this would also show Texas that there is local demand for ranked choice voting, and it would help to move this conversation forward. So we believe passing Prop B, if you're a supporter of ranked choice voting, is a great thing for the movement to ranked choice voting and for Austin in particular.
Thanks. That was a good explanation of the issues. Joanne, did you have any additional comments you wanted to make on this?
Sure. So Common Ground for Texans has partnered with a number of organizations, and one of them is Ranked Choice Voting for Texas. And as part of that initiative, we have been successful in getting 3 bills filed at the Texas legislature. To give you a little background information, preferential voting, which is a very broad term that includes ranked choice voting, was removed from the election code in 1985. And nobody knows why it was removed. My understanding is that there was a rewrite of the election code in '85 and preferential voting was removed. No one seems to understand why. There are 3 bills that have been filed. The first one is HB 117, and it calls for ranked choice voting in party primaries. The second is HB 740. It calls for allowing ranked choice voting for military and overseas voters. And the third one is HB 2457, and that is a local options bill that, if it were permitted and Austin chose to elect its city council through ranked choice voting, it would be permissible. So we're trying to move as quickly as we can. We started this process 2 years ago in the 86th legislative session. We're now in the 87th legislative session. I can tell you that a number of representatives that we've spoken to have basically said that this is a very complicated process and it changes our election process considerably. And so it may very well be that there is an interim charge to take a look at ranked choice voting and what it does and how it works. And that would be at least one step closer to getting ranked choice voting back into the election code. So that's where that sits at the moment.
Thanks. Jason, any other thoughts on this?
Not specifically. I would just, I think it'd be great if the state legislature allowed for it and would actually implement it statewide. I think I would just let you all consider that we would still have runoff elections here locally. We're only talking about the 11 elected officials for the city of Austin. We would still need runoff elections for our county officials, any state elections, and any federal elections.
Thanks. Pam, any clarifying questions that came in on this?
Yes, several. Alexis Garcia asks, is this voting system the one they used in New Hampshire?
It's a voting system that they used in New York just recently. I don't know about New Hampshire. I can tell you that Cambridge, Massachusetts started ranked choice voting in 1941. So we can say it's been around for a long time. I don't know what they did in Massachusetts, in New Hampshire.
Yeah, Dan Eckham suggests that maybe the questioner meant Maine rather than New Hampshire, because Maine does use ranked choice voting.
Then that would be true. And I gather that Alaska has also passed ranked choice voting for all of their elections as well.
Another question comes from Anna Salas-Porras. Is there any research about ranked choice voting increasing voter turnout and or decreasing political tribalism?
Andrew, you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, it increases voter turnout in that it allows the voters of the high turnout general election to choose the winner. Because right now we have many, many races decided in those runoff elections, and that's decided by a lower turnout. So in terms of increasing turnout in the decisive election, it certainly does. And there is that great research I mentioned around decreasing negative campaigning. Joanne, which it does by about 30%, and voters are very satisfied with the move to ranked choice voting. Joanne may have more to add here. I will drop into the chat a link to a research paper by the Campaign Legal Center. It's a memo about a few pages, 8 pages or so, and it documents the many benefits of ranked choice voting and the research it has links to the academic research that they're referring to.
And you can also refer people to Fair Vote, which covers ranked choice voting in all of its gory details, which is nice. One of the reasons that people like ranked choice voting is because they don't have to play the game of who do they think is going to be electable. They don't have to make the choice between, I really like these two candidates, but I've got to pick one. And in ranked choice voting, they don't have to do that, right? They can rank the person that they really, 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 really like, and then the person that they like next. So there's the ability to have voters feel more invested in the outcome.
Thanks. Any other questions, Ham?
Yes, Bruce Cobbs comments that ranked choice voting would make it difficult for older voters to understand. It needs to be explained to people exactly how it works. It may save money, but it will be confusing. And then he also comments that it can lead to vote splitting.
Actually, it doesn't lead to vote splitting. And you're absolutely right that all places that have implemented ranked choice voting have started an educational campaign of its citizens so that they clearly understand what it's all about. And for those places that have used it, they really, the outcome, especially like of the most recent New York City outcome, something like 75 to 80% of the people who came out said that they were absolutely delighted.
Marilyn Bostic asks for some examples of the cities that currently do ranked choice voting. And she asks respectfully, who is everybody?
The people who walked out of the polls.
Okay, we listed some of the states earlier that did it.
Yeah.
Andrew, you want to list some of the cities? I know Albuquerque does.
Yes. So in terms of states, Alaska will do it as of next year. They just passed it through a referendum. Maine has used it for a couple of cycles, as was mentioned. Here are a few cities with populations more than 100,000 who currently use ranked choice voting. Cambridge, Massachusetts, as Joanne mentioned, Berkeley, California, Las Cruces, New Mexico, Minneapolis, Minnesota, as well as St. Paul. San Francisco and Oakland, and New York City, the largest city in the country, is using it as of this year. I will post a link in the chat to a list of jurisdictions that currently use it. And of course, on Fair Vote, they have a lot of data around this as well. It's also used, by the way, for overseas and military ballots in the Deep South and in other places across the country when the timing of having to send ballots back and forth for a runoff would not make sense. So it's been tested all across the country, and I'll post a link.
And it's used in a book club that I run to choose our next book.
So this is one of the interesting benefits of Zoom. You get this chat window where you can actually post all sorts of references, which you couldn't easily do in a live meeting. Okay, I want to move on. Those are actually two of the easier questions.
Here they are.
And talk about Proposition F, which is the most complex, the most controversial, and probably the most impactful in terms of the Austin government. And that is changing from a city manager council form of government to a strong mayor form of government. And as usual, we want to give Andrew to go first in terms of being in favor of this, and then we'll go right to Jason after that. So Andrew, can you start by explaining a little bit of detail about what this actually implies?
Yes, thank you, Mike. This would be a change in our form of government, as Mike said, moving from a city manager form of government to what's called a mayor council form, or commonly called a strong mayor form. And it does a couple of things. One is it lets voters choose the person who leads our city government. That's the most significant change here. Right now, we have an unelected city manager who is the chief executive of the city. And all the city departments, or most of them, report to the city manager. He has full discretion to hire city department heads, assistant city managers, deputy city managers. He is able to hire the city attorney with full discretion. And as a result, has broad power to make day-to-day policies for the city and set the direction of the city. He currently writes the budget, oversees that process as well. And we are one of the few large cities in the country that still has this system of government. In fact, 2/3 of the largest cities in the country have a mayor council or strong mayor form of government. And so we have proposed a shift, but the name can be a little bit confusing. The name suggests that we're moving to a kind of monarch, somebody who is going to rule over the city. And instead, we're moving to something that we're all familiar with, which is a kind of American constitutional form of government. Two different branches of government: the legislative branch, the council; the executive branch, the elected mayor. They would have checks and balances over each other, but they would have a separation of powers and be equal in status and power. The mayor would have the ability to hire the department heads like the city manager does now. The big difference would be that the mayor is accountable to us on a regular basis so that we could vote for that person or vote them out if we don't like the direction of the city. Also, many of the city manager's powers would move to the council as well. I'll give you a couple of examples of that. For example, right now I mentioned the city manager appoints the city attorney. However, in the new system we're proposing, there would be a balance of powers between the mayor and the council. The mayor would appoint the city attorney, but the council would have to confirm the city attorney for that person to take office. Similarly, the council would be able to oversee and replace the city attorney. So there would be accountability to both branches there. A lot of attention has been focused on the veto power. And this would be a veto power like we're familiar with at the state and the federal level, where the executive would have the ability to veto legislation. But importantly, the council would have the ability to override that veto. It's not mentioned in the ballot language, but the council would have a 2/3 override, just like the Congress does, or every other mayor council city in the country and every state with a veto would have the ability to override that veto with 2/3. What that means is that the council remains the supreme legislative and budgetary authority of the city. They can pass any law or any budget they would like over the objection of the mayor. The benefit that we receive as voters is that now we would have an executive that is accountable to voters on a regular basis. That's the big change here. The change is not in the powers of the executive. The change is in who gets to choose that person. And we would be expanding the choice of who gets to choose that person from the 11 members of the council to the nearly 1 million voters of the city. A larger and more diverse electorate for that position than we currently have today. There are lots of details around this proposal, and I know that Jason is not in favor of it, and his group is not in favor of it. So I want to make sure there's plenty of time for him to speak and plenty of time for questions on this issue. But the key thing that I want to highlight is the benefit we're all receiving of having democratic accountability in all parts of our government, both the legislative and now the executive.
And thanks for making the time for additional discussion of this. Jason, you're up.
Thanks, Mike. I would just start out by saying the strong mayor proposal is a concentration of power. It's a consolidation of power at City Hall. And it's a backsliding on the gains that we've made from the 10-1 system that was implemented not very long ago. We haven't been under 10-1 for very long, and that was a very long process to get it in place. Giving the mayor so much power would be undemocratic, and it would weaken our community voices throughout the city. It's a step backwards. Giving an executive with veto power over district representatives is not something that we think is more democratic. We think it's more expedient maybe to get things done, but more democratic is, we very much oppose that. And it's not that I disagree with it. It is that a majority of progressive organizations in our community disagree with it. That's why the entire labor community has joined arms against this. Rarely are all of the unions so solidified around a single issue. That's why we have partners like the Sierra Club, like Clean Water Action, and others in the environmental community who know what it is to get things done at City Hall and know what a detriment this would be to our current democratic system. We know that criminal justice advocates have also joined our coalition. We saw this for what it was, and that is a consolidation of power. Originally the petition that got all of these that Andrew circulated, that he nearly independently financed, the whole process. The initial petition had all of these amendments on one petition, so that by signing one signature, you approved of all of them. And we saw that as a blanket manipulation. After reviewing the 10-1 system, it was clear, as Mike said at the beginning, that the strong mayor proposal would have far more influence and far more effect on our local government than the others. We appreciate the efforts to expand the electorate and to increase participation in our local elections, but we just saw the strong mayor proposal as a bridge too far, and that's why our coalition of progressive organizations, our growing coalition, opposed to these measures. We were left out of the process, as I mentioned before. We tried to petition Andrew and ask him to reconsider this one proposal back in December because we knew that once the petitions were submitted, the language on those petitions was finalized. We were left out of the process. We think that this proposal is flawed. It's deeply flawed, and giving the veto power over our community representatives, over our district representatives, is not democratic, and it is not progressive. And I'd love to entertain questions about it. I think one of the main reasons that we came out so strongly early on, especially my union, AFSCME, the Public Employees Union, is that this new strong mayor would have authority to hire and fire all department executives. That would essentially politicize all of our departments and all of our department heads to where we no longer have professional hiring. We would have political appointees and political cronies from an elected mayor that are being appointed to these department heads positions. And so we strongly oppose those. I'm putting in the chat our initial letter to Andrew back in December, which thankfully he responded to, but not with the response that we had hoped for. And so here we are. I'm spending my beautiful Saturday afternoon trying to defend our democratic institution from this power grab, essentially.
Thanks, Jason. I want to let Andrew respond to that. And a question for Andrew is, are there any specific examples of a situation that you think it could have been handled better without the current city manager role?
I do, yes, and I certainly would love to respond to Jason's points and appreciate them. Well, we all agree, and this gets to your question, Mike. We all agree that I think on both sides of this issue, that 10-1 was a very good thing and moved our city forward in many ways. and certainly in terms of increasing representation geographically, racially, socioeconomically. And however, it also exposed a flaw in the city manager system. You know, we changed 10.1 about 7 years ago, but our city manager system has been around for nearly 100 years, and it was not changed by 10.1. What 10.1 did was show that there is a weakness still in our system of government when it comes to democracy and making people's voices heard. Because we have seen over the last 5 years or so, or 7 years, multiple overwhelming votes by the council, 11-0, 10-1, beyond a supermajority, votes where all of our elected representatives agree. All of them. Everyone elected in the city of Austin agrees on an issue. And yet, the thing that that vote is about, the thing that they're voting for, doesn't happen, or it happens very slowly, or it is otherwise thwarted in some way. And that's because the city manager who is not elected does retain a kind of pocket veto, a kind of administrative veto over council action, where they can decide not to do the thing that council has asked them to do. And we've seen, I can post a list of examples in the chat that I will throw up here in a moment. And so we believe that by electing our executive, first of all, we'll be electing them from the same people who elect the council. So we're much more likely to see agreement. But also we'll be able to have that person who's in that job be held accountable to the voters for following through on the will of the people. And that is one of the key benefits of this system, is we will have somebody who will not only be more likely to be aligned with our other elected representatives, but will be accountable for executing the laws that they pass. On the subject of professional management, I couldn't agree more that professional management for a city is critical. And if you look at the other cities across the country, Nashville, Denver, Seattle, San Diego, Boston, other cities that use this form of government that we're advocating for, you see professional managers employed by the mayor, people in cabinet level positions who are responsible for departments and for the good work of those departments, responsible for executing the vision of the mayor that everybody voted for. And that's because the mayor would have a huge incentive to make sure that he has or she has competent people in positions, in the cabinet level positions, because the mayor, they would be accountable for the performance of those departments and how closely they hew to the values of the city. You could argue that you can make the same argument, and I'll wrap up here to allow for more questions, but you could make the argument that, well, we shouldn't elect the president and we should have the Senate elect the president, because that way we'll get a professional manager who will hire professional people to run cabinet departments. And that's a complicated job, of course. It has control over the military. It has control over departments that educate and feed our country. But none of us would advocate for disposing of our right to elect the president, because that's a democratic action and a democratic level of accountability and ownership that we want in our system. And all we're suggesting is that we should have that same level of accountability and ownership over our executive branch here in Austin as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Jason, I want to give you final say on the panel. Then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, and Councilwoman Leslie Poole, if you have any comments, you can be right up after Jason if you want.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. You know, I think Andrew speaks to, he spoke to a lot of things. I want to point out that currently our city manager is accountable to the panel of elected district representatives that we currently have. He is fully accountable to them. And, you know, maybe some people didn't get what exactly they wanted to happen through City Hall. And so they're trying to consolidate power so that they can more quickly expedite the things that they think should be happening. But when things, when things are slow to be enacted, it just makes me laugh to think that this is the solution, right? That somehow we should consolidate all of this power into one person, and that's going to solve all of the things that we think that we want to happen, or the problems that we see in our local government. We know that a citywide election is not going to be representative of a large population of our city. I mean, the at-large city council never had a representative south of the river. They never had a representative from the east side, except for through the gentleman's agreement, which we all know was racist in and of itself. And so to think that we should backslide on district representatives on a council, a panel of people who collectively make decisions on behalf of the city, that we should take that away from them and instill all of that power into one person, I just don't see that as a good solution. You know, it reminds me of a snake oil salesman who tells you that if you have issues, whatever ails you, this will fix it. And that's what this strong mayor proposal is. And I just couldn't disagree with it more.
Thanks. Jason, Leslie Wool, did you have any comments you wanted to add here? Nothing? Okay, we'll go on. I have to say this is one of the more interesting discussions we've had. Very educational, interesting to see the disagreements on basically progressive groups on this one particular issue. It's not something we've had in a long time here, but I'm sure there is going to be a lot of comments and questions on this one. So Ham, let me turn it over to you.
Okay, Bruce Cobbs comments that Proposition F would make it pro-party instead of pro-people.
Okay, go on.
Anybody want to respond to that?
I appreciate that comment, and I think that we're certainly all aligned that we want to be pro-people over pro-party. We don't believe in changing our system. We didn't propose changing our system to partisan elections, for example. And so, but I do think that there's a very important point within that I want to draw out, which is that right now, fortunately, we've moved our elections from May to November. And I think that was a very critical step for Austin to take, because the at-large system that we had under the old May elections, as Jason rightly highlighted, was not producing diversity on the council, certainly geographically and in just about every other way as well. And the move to November diversified our electorate in every way and has resulted in more diverse elections for all of our, for across our council and across the mayor as well. Now, however, there is this question of who is the electorate that should choose our chief executive. And Jason said correctly that the city council right now has that power to hire or replace the city manager. I do want to point out, though, that because of our history of racial and economic segregation in our city, we have a situation where we live in a city that is majority people of color, but a majority of our city council districts are drawn such that they are majority white and wealthier on average than the city as a whole. So a majority of our council is drawn from districts that are majority white, and it takes a majority of the council to certainly make any policy, and especially to choose the chief executive. The citywide electorate would be more diverse, and we'd have hundreds of thousands of people from across the city, especially in November of a presidential year, voting for our chief executive. And we believe that, because, just to point this out, if the city electorate, if the mayor's electorate were a district, it would be among the most diverse districts with the closest to average median family income of any district in the city, among the most diverse districts, both racially and economically in the city. So we believe that that district, if you will, that electorate, because it's so much closer to the city as a whole, ought to be, is more democratic if it is the electorate that chooses our mayor, and not just because it's many, many more people, but because it's more representative as well.
I want to make sure we have time to get to all the questions.
If I could respond,
Sure.
I'm not sure how that was responsive to what Ham said, but to point out if there are flaws with the districts, and we think that there are flaws with how the districts are drawn, we should redraw the districts. We should reconsider how the lines are drawn. We shouldn't just consolidate power within a single elected official, within a single person, an unknown person in the future, to right that wrong. I'm not sure that that makes sense to me. And to the actual question about this being very politically driven, I would say that's one of the flaws of this proposal, is that it assumes that we will like whoever gets elected and that they will be on our side and that they will want to enact the things that the city council does and that they will align with the interests of the community. We know that it's a lot easier to get rid of or to replace a bad hire than it is to recall an elected official, especially a mayor and an at-large city. So thanks for the question, Ham.
Yeah, I see that Councilwoman Leslie Poole is unmuted now successfully.
Yeah, thanks. The system wouldn't let me unmute previously. Thanks for helping out. All that I will say about Prop F and Andrew's big idea here is that amassing power and veto authority in one person, that's undemocratic. The veto power, which he is soft pedaling, is actually a very high hill. It's a mountain to climb. Council members, of which the elected city manager, mayor, power figure, would not be subject to the Texas Open Meetings Act. The Texas Open Meetings Act governs how many of us elected officials can talk to one another about policy issues. You may remember the big scandal that was with the previous council with the walking quorums that County Attorney David Escamilla guided the city through to a good resolution. I can't talk to more than 4 other of my colleagues on the dais, but the elected city manager mayor could talk to any and all of us at any time. In order to overcome the veto, we would have to have a supermajority, which would be 8 or 9 people. That would be next to impossible to happen. And that's why amassing power and veto authority in one person, the elected mayor, city manager, is undemocratic.
Thank you. Let's get to some more of the comments or questions from the audience.
Okay, Dan Eckham points out that the PDF that Andrew posted says there would be 11 single member districts. And he asks, why an extra district? Is the 11th overlapping some of the others?
I can provide a quick answer to that question. Originally, Dan, our proposal included an extra single member district to replace the vote of the mayor on the council. The mayor would no longer vote on the council, introduce legislation, preside over meetings, have no legislative power at all. And so we proposed the addition of a new district, and there are many other reasons why we believe that's a good idea. That is now a separate proposition, Proposition G, on the ballot. It has been divided by the council into a different proposition to add a new district.
Okay, and that's just one of the ones we're not covering today, but it's also on the ballot.
And it will be covered on March 27th.
Ham, next.
Yes, Marilyn Bostick asks, who is we all agree? We all don't. I think she's referring to the 10-1 change.
I get her somewhat biting comment there. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that, if we just want to go on to other comments too.
Lance Vincent asks, why not just eliminate the city manager's pocket veto where the council's vote was unanimous or virtually so.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Sure, I'd be happy to take that one, and perhaps Jason or Councilmember Poole may want to as well. Our steering committee of 15 people looked at different options for how to address this issue of a veto or not. And I want to highlight them in particular. I think a couple of times today it's been referred to as my proposal, and I don't think that's close to the truth. Our 15 steering committee members proposed this. It belongs to them. And then we moved it to through our community, through a process, and then ultimately through the petition. I have been a financial supporter of this campaign, and I'm proud to do that because I believe in expanding the right to vote and expanding turnout. But I don't want to disrespect the work of our steering committee, 60% of whom were people of color, more diverse than either of the last two city-run charter commissions. And I want to make sure to respect the work that they did and give them proper credit for crafting these proposals. But to this point about this is a function of, I think, how the council acts, mainly through resolutions, which are non-binding council actions, less frequently through ordinances for policymaking, especially at the executive, with the executive branch. And those resolutions allow the city manager to have this kind of discretion. We believe that structurally, the city would be better served by two democratic branches acting together to pass legislation and to oversee each other's performance and accountability to the public.
Yeah, I would just say that I disagree with Andrew's framing that there is a pocket veto. There is no such thing. The city council has final legislative say over the operations of over the policy of the city and over the lawmaking of the city. The city manager is hired to operationalize and enact those policies. Furthermore, if you read the ballot language itself, the system that they're setting up creates an authority with even less accountability than the city manager has now. While he would have an explicit veto that Councilmember Poole spoke to, that would be a very high bar for the city council to overcome, there's also no binding legal authority of the city council or obligation of the city manager to enact what the city council has passed. You know, Andrew will say he disagrees with that analysis, but that is not an analysis. That is a description, a legal description of what the charter amendment does.
Okay, Ham, do we have another question?
Yes, Gretchen Otto comments, I think anyone who has seen The Wire would disagree that this always works out. The opportunities for corruption are many.
Okay, let's go on.
Joanne Richards says, we had an independent citizens redistricting board drawing our districts.
And therefore they were drawn fairly with representation of various groups around the city because it was designed that way from the get-go.
I also saw a question in the chat about which cities use a strong mayor form of government, and I think Andrew answered that Houston does. I would say that some of our coalition partners, some of our statewide partners have experience in other cities and with strong mayors, and that is one of the reasons that they stand with us in opposition to it, because they know how difficult it is to work with a strong mayor system. Imagine working with your community, working with stakeholders in the community to bring a proposal to your city council member, your district representative, and asking them to get something on the agenda. And the very first question that they ask is, well, where does the mayor stand on this? Because without the mayor's support, it is very unlikely that it would get implemented. And that is the political situation that we would be setting up with a strong mayor, where things that are not palatable to the mayor would not happen. And city council members know that from the front.
And we have
How many comments do we have?
We have one last comment from Bruce Cobbs. He's referring to the 11th district. He says the extra district is gerrymandering.
Okay, thanks.
I can also make another comment about the 11th district, and it was brought up in city council, and that was the question really that was raised was, you know, if you only have 10 districts, that means you have an even number and you should have an odd number. And Ann Kitchen, I think it was, who brought up the fact that there are plenty of occasions where there might be one city council person that's off dais, and they seem to be able to pass resolutions and laws pertaining to the city, even if there were an even number of city council people sitting on the dais. The only thing that I can think of is that as the population of the city increases, then there may be a need for changing the districts, but that can be done every 10 years like we do it in the census.
And I would add that there's a process for that, and it's called independent redistricting, and it should be done through a privatized stakeholder process that then is brought about through a small group of individuals.
May I jump in on that one?
Briefly, because we have other topics too.
Sure. The districting is independent, absolutely, per our charter. We have proposed, I know we're not talking about it today, separately adding a new district because our population has grown. And without that district, without the independent commission having the ability legally to draw that district, we will all be living in larger districts next year with our vote counting less for neighborhoods, for communities, for grassroots voices.
Thank you. Because this was such a important proposition and a complex one, we wanted to give it extra time here. I think we've heard from all the different viewpoints and comments. So I'd like to.
There is one more comment.
One more comment?
Just came in.
Go ahead.
Anna Pitala asks, how is it right to put this on a midterm election when there is less representation, especially during a pandemic when people are in fight and flight mode, full of cortisol, and can't make good decisions due to the elevated stress?
Fair comment. I'm not sure there's anything else to add to that, but you know, it's a concern of all of us.
I could jump in on that briefly, Mike. I'll be very brief.
Be very brief, please.
I will. It's a very good question. There are legal reasons why it had to be done. I'm going to post a blog post in the chat that you can read that explains why this happened. And we agree. We don't think this is a great thing. We're unfortunately forced to do it.
Thanks. Okay. So in interest of time, we do have one more proposition we want to cover. And this had to do with adopting voluntary public campaign financing for the city elections. And this is Proposition H. And I'm wondering if Joanne had some background information just to explain this a little bit more.
Sure. And Andrew and Jason, if you permit me, the city of Austin now has what's called the Austin Fair Campaign Contract that was written in the 1990s. And it was the best that they could do at the time, but it has flaws. So it is a voluntary program that all public funding programs have to be because of the Citizens United decision. Any candidate that chooses to run on the Fair Campaign Contract has contribution limits, has expenditure limits, as you would expect. the monies through the fair campaign contract can only be used in a runoff election. So if you're not a strong enough candidate to get to a runoff, then you are not eligible to use any of these funds. There is also an escape clause that almost makes it an unusable campaign funding mechanism. And the escape clause is that if there is any candidate that exceeds their expenditure limits or their contribution limits, then the contract that you sign is null and void, and you can spend or accept contributions at with no limit. So it doesn't have a whole lot of teeth. The monies come from a number of different sources: the lobbying fees, donations, liquidated damages, criminal fines, collection violations of campaign laws, filing fees. Any money that was unused for the campaign needs to be brought back in. And there was a group 2 years ago that lobbied for democracy dollars in the Charter Review Commission. It was recommended out of the Charter Review Commission to go to City Council. City Council chose not to put it on the ballot. And so we're back asking for this possibility again. One of the best arguments for something like democracy dollars is that currently we have a 10-1 system that allows us to have geographic distribution on our city council. What it doesn't do is to allow us to have financial distribution in our elections. And so what ends up happening is that 25% of the people get to fund 75% of the campaigns. And that can be somewhat problematic. One of the nice things about democracy dollars is that you get to have a voucher, and your voucher can be used for the candidate that you choose to support. Whereas in the current system, it's used to whoever runs the runoff, and that's not necessarily the candidate of your choice. So we're using local money for candidates that may not be of your choice. It's also come to our attention that the campaign contract funds that are distributed are somewhat problematic. It's difficult to determine who actually is eligible, how much money there is, and whether that money is distributed properly. And so the Democracy Dollars program would be scrapped. The Austin Fair campaign contract would be eliminated, and the Democracy Dollars program would be put in place. Question is, are all of the vouchers that are distributed used? The answer is no. If you choose not to support a candidate who's running for election, that is your choice. But you give your voucher to a particular candidate. The candidate uses that voucher to collect money from the fund. Seattle, Washington was the first city to use the system. I have personal relatives who have used it and have liked it. So that's the background information that I really wanted to provide, so that you have some idea of what there is currently, and maybe one or two of the advantages of Democracy Dollar. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. And this particular proposition would give two $25 vouchers for each person in Austin, each registered voter, that you could use to donate to the campaign of your choice for city office. Okay. And it's something that, as you might have guessed from Joanne's detailed background, that Common Ground for Texas has been very interested in for quite a while. And I'm glad to see this on the ballot. So let's open up for our panel for some final comments. Andrew and then Jason on the voluntary public campaign financing proposition?
Well, I think that Joanne had a wonderful summary of the program. I would only add to those details from Seattle. This is a program that has been studied. The cost to taxpayers is low, less than the city spends on its cell phone bill. But the returns are extremely high. In particular, in Seattle, the number of donors has increased in just the first 5 years or so of the program to almost 10 times what it was before. That means almost 10 times more people participating in getting involved with campaigns and supporting campaigns. Those donors are more diverse in every way. More women donating, more people of color, more people earning under $100,000 per year, and more younger people, all now more involved as donors to campaigns. It has also increased the number of candidates who can run, because you no longer need to be on the wealthy side or have wealthy friends to be able to run for office or to compete. And finally, it has increased voter turnout. Individuals who are infrequent voters are 4 times more likely to vote if they use their democracy dollars than if they don't. So it has a big impact on voting. All of these things together would be wonderful things for our democracy, especially given the concentration of donations that Joanne pointed out. And that's why we are supportive of the Democracy Dollars plan.
Thank you. Jason, you have the last word on this?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I think that a public campaign financing program is great in theory. I think there are some significant differences from the Seattle program, especially for an organization that claims to want to make it the most progressive. There are some people that are left out of the public campaign finance program, specifically people that are eligible to contribute to campaigns but cannot vote. It's currently limited to people who are registered to vote. So that would exclude legal permanent residents, which more commonly known as green card holders. And it would also exclude people with a criminal history who are ineligible to vote, but able to make contributions and want to continue to contribute to our political environment, want to continue to be politically engaged. The other flaw in this is that it's very specific. You'll notice that it names $25 in our city charter. It will name that. These are things that through a public vetting process, something that was not privatized, we would have been able to address these flaws and make this the right system for our local government. Through more public vetting, we could have improved upon these things. And I think the city council has the authority to implement a better system. That is why working people came together to oppose all of these, because we saw them for what they are. They were basically a Trojan horse for this power grab that is in Prop F. If we really wanted to implement a good public finance proposal, we could have done that, and we should do that. I think we will do that as a community. And I don't think that the proposal by APR is what we should go with.
Thanks. For the sake of time, I would like to go to Joanne. Did you have comments?
Yeah, let Andrew respond.
Okay.
I'd just like to respond to those points briefly. We believe in expanding the program, and in fact, Council Member Greg Kazar, who has endorsed Proposition H, has proposed 2 fixes to the program that our campaign supports. And he's introduced those as ordinances for the City Council to pass. Secondly, on this Trojan horse comment, individuals, voters, can vote for any of these that they like. They're not one package. You can vote for any of these 5 and not vote for the ones that you like. And understandably, the one about strong mayor has drawn much attention and much conversation. And if folks are not fans of that, then there's obviously no need to vote for it. But the other proposals are very strong in terms of increasing voter turnout and representation as well. And as progressives and as Austinites, but just as people who are fans of voting, which I know that this group is, regardless of party. We don't need to vote down all of these proposals. If you don't like one of them, you can vote for the ones that would have a clear and studied and endorsed impact on voter turnout. And that is our ultimate goal as a campaign.
And I think I would just add that I'm very glad that our city council member is able to address those flaws. I think it is proof that the current structure of our government can address the issues and concerns of our community, and that we don't need to accept proposals from a very privatized process to improve upon our government.
Pam, any comments?
Yes, a couple of questions. Same question came from Bruce Cobbs and John McNabb, and that is, where does the funding for the vouchers come from?
I can answer that briefly. The cost of the program would be less than $850,000 per year. We have some offsets built into our plan. For example, as Joanne mentioned, we would be replacing the city's underutilized and ineffective current system, which draws its funding from lobbyist fees and other registration fees like that and contributions. So part of our plan would be offset by that. And then once we are able to eliminate our runoff elections, you can think about the hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings that would come from that as offsetting this plan. The balance would come from the general fund.
Mike, can I add to that?
Sure.
So the cost of the program, what Andrew is giving you is $50 times however many voters he's chosen. I don't know, was it about 800,000 voters, Andrew?
No, I'm using the numbers provided by our 2018 Charter Review Commission appointed by the City Council that recommended democracy dollars by a vote of 7-3, yet we never had the chance to vote on it as a city. It was not on the ballot.
$800,000 for that is what the program would cost. That actually is a lowball estimate. The city clerk who would oversee the program would have to create a program for it because you're talking about tax dollars and they have to be audited and protected. And so there would be staffing required. There would be computers and other office paraphernalia that would be necessary for this. So the starting number is the 800,000 that Andrew is giving you. His number also doesn't include the fact that Austin is growing. So the $50 times whatever the number was of voters that he put it against would be the lowest amount of money for the vouchers themselves, because that would continue to expand and grow. It also his number does not include the cost of the oversight and operations for that program. And it also does not give the city council the ability, should we have a downturn and have to lay off staff, it does not give the city council the option of not funding those vouchers, even if that would be determined to be the most pragmatic action if we were having to do a reduction in force. And that is also something that has not been discussed very much, but it troubles me deeply because there are ways around it. And as Jason pointed out, having this specifically with dollar amounts in the city charter just creates a big barrier for the program should we adopt something along these lines. And I think we probably will, but whatever we adopt will be much more nimble than the framework that Mr. Allison is touting here today.
Okay. Pam?
Bruce Cobbs has another question. Shouldn't that money be voted on to address the homeless issue in Austin instead of a candidate for election? Why can't we vote on that?
Okay, next. Good point. But we kind of are voting on it now.
Another question comes from Joyce Stats. Would Proposition H have any impact on what a candidate can spend on their own?
It would, once it's amended by the ordinance proposed by Greg Kazar. So I'll explain exactly what it does. it doesn't change the private campaign financing system for the city. It doesn't change our campaign contribution limit to $400, for example. Those do not change. Instead, the democracy dollars do count towards those limits. So if you give your $25 voucher to somebody, then you can only give them $375 more. We did not place spending limits on candidates in the program, like Seattle does have. Seattle has spending limits on the program. Let me explain the two reasons why we didn't do that. One is that national democracy reform organizations implored us not to add those restrictions because the courts are very eager to overturn those restrictions. And we know that our Supreme Court currently is not a fan of campaign finance reforms. So they do not want us, through the Texas courts and the federal courts in Texas, to be the reason why campaign finance public programs are struck down across the country. And they said, please do not include limits on spending among participants. And Seattle has a much more, I'll say, permissive federal court up there. But we do not down here. And that's the advice we received from multiple parties nationwide, experts in the field. The second reason from the steering committee was the point of this program is to empower people who do not have the money to run or who are going to be underdogs more likely in a race. And wealthy candidates who run will have no restriction on what they spend if they don't participate in the program. So our steering committee said, why would we want to tie one hand behind the back of participating candidates by saying they must follow a spending limit if the wealthy candidates cannot? And then, so then that's the two reasons why. Now, I believe Jason or others opposing this will argue that, well, the wealthy candidates are going to participate in the program, and so they're going to spend their millions, and they're going to also draw taxpayer funding as well. Our steering committee of 15 people looked at that and said, the candidate that does that will rightly face excoriation by the public for doing so. And they believe that there was significant political disincentive not to do that. And they were concerned about the legal problems there. Mr. Kazar has proposed a reasonable solution that we're certainly in favor of. And so we're supportive of capping self-financing from candidates who participate in the program. And that is what Councilmember Kazar has proposed. Thank you.
Jason, you were called out. You want to respond?
Oh yeah, I'll just clarify. Like I said, I think public financing campaign program is a great theory, and we should try to implement one here. I think our city council has the authority to do that. And what you're seeing now is our community representatives cleaning up the mess from this privatized process. I mean, it's great that 15 self-selected people vetted this, 15 invited people to this private process, all agreed that this is what it should be. But there are some deep flaws in it, and we as a community are going to have to come together and correct those flaws to make it really workable and feasible for our community. I'm really hesitant to lock in such specificity into our city charter. I think as our city grows and as we learn from the program, we should be more flexible with the specific amounts and which races we are able to support. So, I think there are some just deep flaws in this entire process. And, I appreciate the effort to try to increase democracy locally and increase voter turnout, but I just feel like this process has been flawed, and I would have loved to have participated in it.
Okay, Ham, back to you.
Yep. Judd Rogers asks, for how many elections has Seattle used their democracy dollar system?
They have used them for 2 cycles so far, and they're right now in the middle of their 3rd.
And Joyce Stats asks, how much money goes into the current public funding approach from all the sources that Joanne listed?
It's in the ballpark of $100,000 or so, plus or minus.
Yeah, I don't remember. I have it in another location.
And that's all the questions.
Great.
Proposition H.
So I have one more comment, if I can. I can tell you that 2 years ago, after the Charter Review Commission recommended consideration of democracy dollars before City Council, and it didn't get put on the ballot, there was a movement that to coordinate efforts with City Council to put together a description of campaign finance that would be acceptable to City Council and therefore improve the fair campaign contract. And I think too many other things came to the fore, so it didn't happen. But if I'm here to tell you that if this doesn't pass, we'll probably go to City Council and ask them to put together a better campaign finance system that we currently have. That it's old and it is not being used appropriately.
Okay, I wanted to wrap this up here. Andrew, will you have some final thoughts on that?
I did just have 20 seconds, Mike, if there's time, but if there's not, I understand.
Okay, go ahead, 20 seconds.
Thanks very much. I think it's important to think about encoding these numbers into the charter, just as we have encoded our campaign contribution limits in the charter. We have specific dollar amounts in the charter, $400 now, increases with inflation, because we decided that we wanted to keep important campaign finance rules in the control of the people and not allow them to be rewritten by the candidates that they're meant to affect.
Thank you.
Jason, do you want to comment? Or close?
I can make some closing statements if that's where we are. No, I'm good.
There are a couple of overhanging comments about the whole process of the petition and so forth. Leslie Poole says that Andrew was not, quote, forced to do it, to have the vote on May 1st. That was a voluntary choice on his part. And Anna Pitala says that the people who petitioned to get these propositions on the ballot knew they would be required to be put on a low turnout and less representative election year. They knew before they put out the petition. It is wrong to take advantage of voters in this way. It is a shame to take advantage of voters when they are distracted with a pandemic too. Why wasn't the petition for the propositions delayed? So that's for you, Andrew.
I'd be happy to take that. Thank you. I'll try to be as brief as I can. There is a state law that requires that the city charter of any city cannot be amended more than once every 2 years, and specifically once every 730 days. I mention the number of days because the last time we amended our city charter was November 6th, 2018. Our presidential election last year, which all of us would have preferred to have these charter amendments on, was November 3rd, 2020, 727 days apart. So no charter amendment could be brought by anybody in the last November election. Now here in 2021, there are 3 quick reasons why we believed it had to go now. One is we're currently redistricting, and adding a district would allow us to now fold it into that process at no extra expense for taxpayers and with no confusion of a mid-decade redistricting. Number 2 is if we didn't go now, then these reforms would be delayed until in some cases 2026 or 2028, the latter half of this decade. But most importantly, there are 2 other charter amendments on the ballot this May. And that same 2-year rule, that state law still will apply. So if any of the charter amendments or the other ones were to pass this May, then that 2-year window would start again and no amendments could be brought in November of the midterms, 2022. And we'd be right back here again in 2023 with no democracy reforms and no turnout improvements. So unfortunately, state law has this phenomenon where when the window is open, everybody rushes in to fill it. And we knew that If we didn't do that, we'd be delayed for another 2 years. We agree this is a very, very unfortunate and anti-democratic thing if we all have to only do these amendments in May, but it is the only choice for expanding our democracy, and regrettably, it is one we had to make.
And Jason, any final comments? Don't want to wrap this up?
Sure. I think, our coalition, By the People ATX, and you can see our website, bythepeopleatx.org. It's a growing coalition of people who oppose Prop F, organizations that oppose Prop F. We've gotten some neighborhood groups, we've gotten Democratic clubs are starting to chime in and support our opposition to Prop F. We see it as undemocratic and a consolidation of power, giving a one-person veto power over district representatives. We just see that as fundamentally undemocratic. And so we would urge you all, there are pros and cons to all of the other amendments. I think each can be evaluated on their own merits, but I would strongly ask you all to vote against Prop F.
Thanks, and I want to show appreciation for our panel members, Jason and Andrew today. And for our audience, there's an old rule that says Zoom meetings that last much more than an hour get to be very tiring. And we're at an hour and 40 plus minutes, and we still have a good part of the audience here. That's really amazing. I appreciate your dedication to becoming an informed set of voters. Joanne, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I did want to add two things. Number one, we tried to find folks who were opposed to some of the other amendments, and it's Prop F, I think I've got the right number, letter. It is the one that people feel most strongly about. So it wasn't that we did not try to get folks who opposed some of the other propositions, but we were basically unsuccessful. And so I tried to fill in that position to be a devil's advocate, if you will. I do want to remind people that on April 17th at 2 o'clock, we will have a discussion about how we should be consuming the news. And it's certainly on a current topic. And I'd like to remind people that the League of Women Voters will do the other 4 propositions on March 27th, the same time. The Zoom link is a different link. So make sure that you will all be able to access that, but I want to make sure that people know that it's not the same link that we're using today.
Okay. And this has been one of the most informative and thought-provoking discussions we've had this group in a long time. So I really appreciate everyone's participation here. As Joanne said, next week are the other propositions. One of those, which will be the camping discussion and the impact that will have on our homeless population. So that'll be an interesting discussion too. I encourage everyone to join in on that one.
And for those who wanted to be here today but couldn't be here today, we will put this video up on the website so that others can have access to the conversation.
And I also want to thank everyone for all the wonderful references they put in the chat room. If you want to make a copy of the chat discussion, the 3 little dots in the lower right-hand corner, if you click on that, you can get a copy of everything in the chat window and save it to your computer to look at later. We'll try and keep the window open for a little bit. But again, thank you so much for everyone for taking interest in the Austin politics here. This election will have a big impact on Austin going forward. And I really appreciate your effort to become informed voters. So thank you.
And thank you, Mike.